Proverbs 3, 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Hi, my name is Jeannine, and I am a believer and follower of Jesus Christ, who has given me victory over codependency, and am in recovery for anxiety, people-pleasing, perfectionism, control issues, and lately anger and grief and loss. I was born on July 12, 1954, to Morgan and June McGregor on Chicopee Air Force Base in Massachusetts, number 8 of 10 children. When I was a little over 3 years old, we moved to San Antonio, Texas, where Daddy got stationed at the Air Force Base there. At 4 years of age, I burned my back in a fire when a gas heater leaked out flames and caught my nightgown on fire. My mom told me that if it had happened 15 to 30 minutes later, she and Dad would have been at a meeting. But because my dad was on the phone with his mom, they were still home. I believe God had a hand in that and saved me from being burned worse. All my siblings could do was scream, "Jeannine's on fire!" Daddy dropped the phone, grabbed a throw rug, and wrapped me in it, and we raced to the hospital. As it so happened, Brooke Army Hospital, which was the closest hospital to us, was known at that time for their state-of-the-art innovations and treatments for burn victims, and had people that were burned that were in the service flown in from all over the world, and that's where my dad took me. I spent 3 months in the hospital and then 6 months in outpatient therapy. Back then, there was no such thing as pediatric wards in the service hospital, so I was put on the burn ward with all other burn victims, mostly adults. There was one young man who had saved 2 children from a fire in an apartment complex that was burned so severely on his face that it was entirely covered with bandages except for slits for his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. I decided to approach his bed and see if I could talk with him and encourage him, as I had been told he had no desire to live at that time. Even as a child, I felt God asking me to have courage and talk with this young man, so I did. He said he felt if a child could stand to be near him, he was not so ugly after all, and decided to try eating and improving his health. That made me feel so happy. I also spent a lot of my childhood in and out of the hospital for kidney surgeries and different procedures. At that time, only parents were allowed to visit, so I did not get to see my siblings for 25 to 30 days, about 4.5 weeks, every time I was hospitalized. This was incredibly stressful for me, as I missed them very much. The last hospitalization I had, though, was at Thanksgiving time, and the nurses allowed my siblings to visit me on the porch that was off the ward. That made me happy. When my mom and dad would have to leave the hospital when visiting hours were over, I remembered a verse in the Bible I had learned as a child, which is Joshua 1:9. "Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be terrified, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you may go." That gave me strength to believe I would be fine and to not be afraid. Even though my mom had 10 children to raise, she always had neighbors and their children at our house, telling them about Jesus and how he had saved many of her children from diseases and death. I was taught that it was my job to save anyone who seemed lost. This is where I learned codependency at an early age. My mom also liked to pull up my shirt and show off my scars on my back from being burned and on both sides of my torso from my kidney surgeries to prove to everyone that God had saved me from certain death. This is where my anxiety and people-pleasing started. I felt so embarrassed and damaged. I was raised in an extremely strict home with many rules and regulations with no real explanation of them. I was taught that if you were good enough, that God loved you. But if you were bad, God did not love you, and you needed to be better and follow the rules to be loved. This is where I learned that God was someone to be feared. I was also taught that it was my job as a Christian to save others. I was a very stubborn little girl and seemed to exacerbate my mom. She would threaten to send me to reform school if I were bad, and she could not control me. This was very hurtful and scary to me. I would have nightmares about this happening, and when I would wake up, I would go crawl in bed with my older sister, Janice, and could go back to sleep without having any more nightmares. I wondered when I was young if I reminded my mom of someone she did not care for because she would watch my little brother and my little sister do something and blame it on me. So when Dad got home from work, I would get spanked, even though I told him I did not do it. Mom also said hurtful things to me, like I was a bull in a china shop, and why could I not use my head for something besides a hat rack? I felt unloved and unwanted at times. This is where my perfectionism started, as I felt I needed to be perfect to be loved. I went to private Christian schools from grade 1 to 12 all over the United States, as my dad was in the service and we moved often. I never really got to make many friends since we never stayed anywhere for more than a couple of years at a time. I was bullied at school because I was from a poor family and wore hand-me-downs from one of the rich girls in school, and she let others know. It made me feel terrible and not worthy. I also had trouble most of my life with my weight and was called fat by some of my siblings and classmates, which also made me feel unloved and unworthy and ugly. I attended all 4 years of high school at a private Christian school called Spring Valley Academy and graduated in 1972. When I was in my junior and senior year at Spring Valley Academy, I belonged to a DARE team where we would go around to public high schools promoting abstinence from drugs and alcohol. After I graduated from Spring Valley Academy, I went on to an Adventist college called Union College in Lincoln, Nebraska, where I graduated with a medical office assistant degree. When I graduated from college, I moved to Eugene, Oregon to be near my sister Judy and her family. I was happy when I made the trip from Ohio to Oregon, as my mom and dad made the trip with me, and my mom rode in the car with me a lot of the time. We were finally able to talk as adults and able to hash things out and make amends with each other. I was finally able to see how she did the best she knew how with 10 children, and Dad having been overseas at times and leaving her to raise us all alone. She only had 2 brothers growing up and was raised by a very domineering mom herself, so she did the best she knew how. I attended the Springfield Adventist Church starting in 1977 and held many offices for years. I reached a burnout time from holding too many offices and feeling like I had to be perfect, especially when I was leading the young adults and singing solos in my church and the surrounding churches. So in 1980, I left the church and went out into the world to see what I might have been missing all these years when I felt sheltered. I believe if it was not for my faithful parents, family, and friends in the Springfield Adventist Church praying for me, I might never have returned to Jesus. When I was out in the world, I met the love of my life in 1981, and we were married in 1985. We went on a partying phase for 10 years, drinking and doing drugs, something I never thought I would ever do, as I was always such a goody two-shoes growing up, and I had always been part of the DARE team when I was in high school. Go figure. I had always wanted children of my own, but I was never able to get pregnant. I inherited 2 wonderful stepchildren through marriage. Dan was 11 and Devin was 4 when my husband and I met, and they and my grandchildren have been the joy of my life. When my first grandchild was born, I decided to quit the partying scene and quit smoking, drinking to excess, and doing drugs. I am grateful that my grandchildren have never seen me drunk, doing drugs, or smoking their whole lives. Being clean and sober seemed to cause problems in my marriage, as my husband was still partying and running around with other people who were partying and did not seem to want to spend time with me anymore. I realized at this time that I needed someone I could trust. I remembered from my Bible classes in school the promises that Jesus made, and one of them was found in Deuteronomy 31:6. Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. This is when I decided to start praying and reading my Bible. The more I read my Bible, the more my relationship with Jesus developed. At first, I started just going back to church because I wanted to make my parents happy. I was also curious to see if there was more real love and acceptance at the church. I was so pleased to find more love and acceptance at our church. Soon I developed a closer walk with God and was rebaptized in 2001 here at the Springfield Adventist Church. I joined the worship team and continued developing a closer relationship with Jesus. I love the text in the Bible in Psalms 51:10, which reads, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit in me." And Romans 12:2, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." My husband figured it was just a phase I was going through and that I would quit going to church and go back to partying with him, but thank God I did not. And I continued growing closer to God in my church community. Amen. Some years after this, Jonathan spoke at our church and gave his testimony. I was so impressed that I went up after church and spoke to him about my husband and his drinking problem and was encouraged that God was going to make a way for this to happen. I heard about Celebrate Recovery coming to our church by the pastor, and he asked me if I was willing to help with child care at that time. I did for a little while until things seemed to get bad at home, and I felt I needed to be there. There goes my codependency acting up. My husband has had a drinking problem much of our married life and has been in and out of treatment. Nothing seemed to work to keep him sober until we came to Celebrate Recovery in 2021. Funny how I came to Celebrate Recovery for him and realized I needed help just as much, if not more than him. I found a forever family where I could get help for my hurts, hang-ups, and habits through Jesus Christ. Our relationship has never been as good as it is now since joining Celebrate Recovery. I started attending the small group sharing and realized that I had been blaming all our troubles on his drinking, and finally owned my part in our marital troubles and started making amends for the hurt that I had caused him. We've had a tumultuous 41 years together, but praise the Lord, we've grown closer than we have ever been since coming to Celebrate Recovery. Amen. Psalms 147:3 reads, "He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds." I realized in my brokenness, if not for Jesus' love, mercy, grace, forgiveness, and sacrifice on Calvary and conquering the grave, that there would be no hope for me. In James 1:19 it reads, "My dear sisters and brothers, take note of this, that everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." I have participated in and graduated from 2 step studies. In the step study process, I learned that I have many layers of this onion to peel back and get victories over, such as my desire to people please, to think I must be perfect to be loved, and freedom from anxiety that contributes to my control issues. This was such a wonderful way to dig deeper into God's Word and get to know other sisters in Celebrate Recovery and find more healing for my hurts, hang-ups, and habits. I was searching for a way to honor God in everything I do and say, and to serve others the way Jesus did when he was here on earth. And this is why I believe God led me to my forever family here at Celebrate Recovery. I also learned that even though I have many struggles, that my identity is not found in them, but it's found in Jesus Christ. I have been blessed to be part of this team and to be able to attend 3 Celebrate Recovery summits. Each time I go, I learn how to become a better team player and helper. There is something amazing about worshiping in song, saying the Serenity Prayer, and praying with 3,000 like-minded people from all over the world. One of the things that really stood out to me at all the summits was being able to write down on a piece of paper some of my buried hurts and habits and nail them to the cross. I also appreciated being able to spend quality time with our team, getting to know and love each one of them on a deeper level. 2 of my favorite principles from this program are Principle 5, voluntarily submit to every change God wants to make in my life and humbly ask him to remove my character defects. Happy are those whose greatest desire is to do what God requires, Matthew 5:6. I really like this principle as I have lived my whole life for what I feel others have wanted of me and not necessarily what I wanted. I really want to let God lead me where he wants me to serve him. I also like Principle 8. Yield myself to God to be used to bring this good news to others, both by my example and by my words. Happy are those who are persecuted because they do what God requires. Matthew 5:10. I love all the 12 steps and their biblical comparisons, but I think my favorite step is step 1. We admitted we were powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors, that our lives had become unmanageable. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. Romans 7:18. I have so appreciated having a sponsor and accountability partners to do life with. My first sponsor was Christina. She was so encouraging and helpful. As I mentioned earlier, I have been through and graduated from 2 step study programs. My first one I did for codependency and control issues. This program was very intense and challenging. I had the best leaders, sponsor, and accountability partners in my step study sisters that helped me through this journey. It was very soul-searching and painful to see how I had always tried to control and do things for my husband and family that they could do for themselves, as I thought I knew better than them what was best for them. After getting through this step study, I felt like the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders, and I could let others decide for themselves how they wanted to live their lives. My second step study I did for anxiety, people-pleasing, and perfectionism. I ended up needing a new sponsor as Christina was starting a new chapter in her life and was spending more time with her family. I asked one lady to be my sponsor, but she already had too many ladies she was sponsoring and did not feel she could give me the time that I needed. She did offer to step in as my temporary sponsor until I could pray and ask someone else to be my sponsor. I prayed and felt like God was leading me to ask Candace to be my sponsor, and she accepted after prayerful deliberation. She has been a wonderful and caring sponsor and has helped me grow and work on my hurts, hang-ups, and habits. If I had to go through my recovery alone without my sponsor, I feel I would have relapsed and maybe given up. I would like to encourage newcomers to keep coming back, and as you listen in your small groups, you'll find we're all struggling, but we identify with Jesus Christ, not our problems. I would also encourage newcomers to listen in the small groups to find accountability partners and a sponsor. I would encourage anyone to join a step study, as this is where you dive deeper and get so much healing. This is so much easier when you have a sponsor and accountability partners to help you stay on the course and trust the process. As I close, I want to share 2 texts with you. Jeremiah 29:11-12. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. And Matthew 11:28-30. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Thank you all for letting me share my testimony with you.